You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better. Put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 14th part of What If Deku Meets Powerpuff Girls. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of ChiWriters on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Back in the forest. The air was thick with a creeping, pink mist as Kirishima crouched low behind a tree, holding his breath. His heart pounded in his chest, and every second felt like an eternity as the faint sound of footsteps grew louder. He knew what was coming. Mustard, the villain with a gas-based quirk, was just ahead, moving methodically, weapon in hand. Kirishima's eyes flicked over the dense forest, scanning for his next move, while trying not to inhale the toxic gas creeping through the trees. "Where are you, you little BRT?" Mustard's voice broke through the eerie silence, tinged with frustration. "I know you're close, running like a coward." Kirishima gritted his teeth, forcing his breathing to stay steady. His plan was simple, he couldn't engage directly yet. Not in this mist, not when Mustard had such a clear advantage with his gun and the gas. He needed a way to throw him off, to make Mustard's senses unreliable for just long enough to strike. Kirishima quickly scanned the area, his eyes catching sight of several loose twigs and branches scattered around him. A grin spread across his face, the familiar feeling of a plan forming in his mind. He was no stranger to a good fight, but a smart fight was what he needed now. Using his enhanced strength, he quickly gathered the sticks, snapping them into smaller pieces and tossing them in all directions. The cracking of the branches and the rustling leaves filled the air, creating a cacophony of noise that made it harder for Mustard to pinpoint his location. The mist swirled around them, and the villain's voice shot out once more, filled with irritation. "You think this is a game? Trying to confuse me? I'll make you regret it," Mustard sneered, his finger squeezing the trigger. A bullet whizzed past Kirishima's position, missing him by mere inches. Kirishima held his position, silently moving just a few steps to the left as the mist thickened. His heart raced, but his mind was calm, focused. He knew Mustard would soon tire of firing randomly. The villain's arrogance would get the better of him. Sure enough, Mustard's voice echoed through the mist again, mocking and taunting. "You can't run forever, kid. You should have stayed still. You're just another wannabe hero, too soft for this world." His footsteps grew closer, and Kirishima grinned. Mustard was walking right into his trap. Just as the villain moved into range, Kirishima sprang from his position, bursting out of the mist with a roar. His body hardened in an instant, the crimson sheen of his quirk glowing as he slammed his fist into Mustard's side. The force of the blow sent Mustard stumbling, gasping for air, but Kirishima wasn't done. He followed with a second, even harder punch to Mustard's jaw, knocking the villain out cold with a satisfying GHH. The sound of Mustard's helmet cracking against the ground echoed through the forest. The mist began to dissipate almost immediately as Mustard's quirk was shut off. Kirishima stood over him, panting heavily, his fists still glowing from the force of the strikes. He quickly tore STRP from his shirt and tied it around his mouth and nose, keeping the air clean before the gas had fully dissipated. "DMN, that was close," he muttered to himself as he looked down at the unconscious villain. He wasn't a fan of using force like that, but he'd done what needed to be done. The Class 1B students he was supposed to help had been safely moved to the side, watching from a distance. "Go on, you're safe now," Kirishima called out to them, giving them a nod. They thanked him profusely, and with that, he waved them off, ready to head back to the main camp. Just as he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a flicker of light in the distance, followed by a streak of pink. Kirishima's brow furrowed as he recognized the color immediately. "Bloss," he muttered under his breath, his heart skipping a beat. Without another thought, he darted off, weaving through the trees, heading straight for the source of the light. Blossom was lying in the crater, groaning as she rubbed her head. She slowly got up, muttering under her breath, "Seems like those boys haven't gone soft," before picking herself up. She'd been in an aerial battle with Brick, exchanging fierce blows and kicks, but one swift jolt of speed from him had taken her by surprise. Before she knew it, he had knocked her hard enough that she was sent flying down like a rocket, skidding through the forest and making a path that tore through trees. She was covered in dirt, her clothes torn and grime sticking to her skin, but no real injury sustained. Brushing herself off, Blossom stood up, feeling the fading sting of the impact. Just then, Brick floated down toward her, a mocking smile on his face. "Are you going to cry because of some dirt, sissy?" he taunted, clearly enjoying her situation. Blossom didn't even flinch. She stopped mid-dusting and, with her back still turned to him, "Not everyone is okay, playing in the mud like you and your brothers do," she spoke in a calm, measured voice. Brick scoffed, his smirk widening as he flew toward her, lunging with the intent to strike. Blossom didn't move an inch until the last possible second. Then, with a fierce roundhouse kick, she slammed her foot into Brick's chest so fast and hard that he flew backward, crashing through a tree, then another, and then a third. The sound of the trees snapping echoed through the forest. Blossom landed lightly on her feet, her eyes narrowed in focused satisfaction as she watched Brick momentarily lie under a heap of trees. "But I'm not above getting a little bit dirty, Brick," she muttered, her tone dripping with coolness. Brick quickly got himself off the ground. "You think that was slick, huh?" spitting out dirt. He glared at her with a mixture of frustration and newfound rage. His mullet swayed in the wind, and his eyes flickered with malice. "This fight's far from over, girlie. You're gonna regret messing with me," he growled, floating up to charge. Blossom didn't flinch, her stance as firm as ever. This wasn't the first time she'd faced off against someone who underestimated her. But with Brick, she knew this wasn't going to end in just one punch. He was relentless, and that made him just as dangerous. Her eyes flashed with determination. "You're welcome to try," she said, the calmness in her voice belying the intensity of the battle yet to come. Meanwhile, Kirishima was running through the trees, muttering to himself. "I hope Blossom's okay." I saw that familiar pink light in the distance. I know it was her. His stomach twisted in concern, and when he saw the red light slam into her, sending her plummeting toward the ground, he felt a sickening dread seep into his chest. He ran faster, his heart racing. "I've got to get there," he muttered. "Come on, Blossom." Even when he heard the faint crash in the distance, he didn't stop, pushing himself harder. "Villains around here, I bet," he murmured, his worry rising as he closed in on the scene. When he finally arrived, the sounds of energy blasts both pink and red echoed through the forest. Kirishima paused behind a tree, keeping a safe distance to assess the situation. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw what was happening. No way. Blossom and Brick were engaged in a vicious battle, exchanging powerful energy beams and rapid, close-range strikes. Brick, as expected, was playing dirty, using every opportunity to attack with malicious intent. But Blossom was sharp, dodging his strikes with quick reflexes and responding with her own attacks. Every now and then, Brick took a hit, but he didn't back down, he fired back with blasts of red energy. Blossom soared into the air, dodging yet another blast from Brick. "I said, where's him? What are his plans? And why are you even here?" she called out, unleashing a barrage of pink energy discs. Brick shot his lasers out of his eyes, slicing through the discs and canceling them out with a burst of fiery red light. "You ask so many questions, and you expect me to answer them?" Brick sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You might not be as smart as you think you are." Blossom's eyes narrowed. "Maybe, but I sure am smarter than you." She snapped back, her voice dripping with cold confidence. Brick's grin deepened as he gritted his teeth. "We'll see," he growled. With a furious roar, he charged at her, swinging a punch that Blossom deftly dodged. She stayed agile, flying around him with grace. "Answer my questions," she demanded. "How did you and your brothers get here, and what's your game?" Brick shot back without hesitation, his voice venomous. "We just love destruction. Beating you sissies is just a great bonus." His eyes gleamed with cruelty as he swung another punch. Blossom's eyes flashed, and she zipped in close, ready to attack. The two clashed in close combat. She threw a quick jab, but Brick blocked it with his forearm and kicked at her side. Blossom twisted away, avoiding the strike, and followed up with a sharp kick to his midsection. Brick grunted but countered with an uppercut, narrowly missing her face. They were locked in a flurry of strikes and counters, exchanging brutal punches and kicks with no end in sight. Their movements were fast and calculated, each blow carrying the weight of their rivalry. Finally, they came to a lock, each of them pushing against the other with all their strength. Brick sneered at her, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I hope your sisters are putting up a better fight than this," he said darkly. "For him and the people we're working with, they're really interested in one of you three." Blossom's eyes widened, her mind racing. "Oh no, you don't." Her anger surged, and with a roar, she grabbed onto Brick's arms and spun him at top speed, tossing him straight into the trees once again. She took a deep breath, her emotions boiling over. Without warning, she unleashed a freezing breath that swept through the air, turning everything in front of her into a sheet of ice. Her eyes stayed focused as she waited, her heart pounding in anticipation. Moments later, the red heat flared from behind the frozen wall, and Brick shot out of it, roaring in fury. Like lightning, he slammed into Blossom, tackling her to the ground, pinning her face first into the dirt. He laughed menacingly as he hovered over her. "You're weak," he taunted. Before Blossom could react, Kirishima's voice rang out. "Blossom!" He charged forward, his fists already hardened by his quirk, ready to protect her. Brick heard the shout, and before he could turn to react, Kirishima slammed his fist into Brick's face, sending him stumbling back. Blossom, surprised by the intervention, shot up from the ground in a daze. "Kirishima," she gasped, still trying to catch her breath. "Stay away from her," he commanded, his voice raised. Brick stumbled, rubbing his jaw. His eyes shifted over to Kirishima, now locked onto him with fists raised. The realization hit him, and his grin widened. This just got better. He thought to himself, relishing the idea he had. But before anyone could move, Blossom, her hair flowing and a fierce pink aura glowing around her arms, screamed, "Get back!" She clenched her fists, pulling up massive tree trunks from the ground with a force that sent the ground shaking. She flung them at Brick in rapid succession, 30 trees, all hurtling toward him at full speed. Brick didn't flinch, as his eyes glowed a fiery crimson, as he focused his energy. He sneered at the incoming assault, his body heating up with volcanic fury. Flames erupted from his hands and eyes, swirling around him in a protective barrier of fire. The trees were incinerated instantly as they made contact with the flames, turning to ash before they could even reach him. The heat was intense, and the area surrounding Brick was a furnace of fire and destruction. Blossom and Kirishima were already running away, with Kirishima looking back at the fiery destruction in the stranger's wake. "Keep running." The sound of Blossom's panicked voice shook Kirishima's concentration back on her. Blossom grabbed onto Kirishima's arm, ready to take off, when his voice broke through the tension. "Who was that, Bloss?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes darting to the horizon, already feeling the urgency of the moment. "We don't have time. We need to." But Kirishima cut her off, his voice laced with concern. "Bloss, that guy and you were fighting, and he was beating you up." Blossom's gaze hardened, and she shot back, her tone defensive. "Yes, and I had it under control. And we need to." Kirishima didn't let up, his brows furrowing as he pressed on, "But you know the guy?" Her heart skipped a beat at his words. For a moment, she found herself speechless, the weight of his question settling over her like a heavy cloud. Kirishima was too close now, his worried gaze piercing her defenses. She could feel the pressure mounting. "Blossom," he said softly, his voice almost pleading, "who is he?" Blossom opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? Not now, not when everything was so tangled, so complicated. Before she could find the right words, a distant sound of destruction ripped through the air, a sharp reminder that they had no time to waste. Roar! Blossom seized the opportunity without a second thought. "Let's go. Someone could need our help." She didn't wait for him to process, her grip tightened around his arm, and in an instant, she propelled them both into the air at full speed, the force of their takeoff kicking up debris in their wake. Kirishima hesitated for just a second, still clearly confused, but before he could protest or ask anything more, Blossom had already grabbed onto his arm and flew in the direction of the area at quite a speed. As Kirishima and Blossom made their way toward the chaos, they suddenly heard a guttural roar, like a beast's scream that seemed to shake the very air. Blossom's heart skipped a beat as she wondered to herself, "What is that?" Before she could process, Kirishima shouted, "Look out!" A shadowy claw zipped toward them from the darkness. Blossom acted on instinct. With swiftness, she yanked Kirishima out of the way, just as the massive claw crashed through the trees, splintering trunks and sending debris flying. Blossom held on to Kirishima in the air, just above the treetops, her mind racing. Below, the scene was in chaos. What beheld them was their classmates, Izuku, Todoroki, and Shoji, who were all trying to stop what looked to be Tokoyami, whose quirk was out of control. They were all in bad shape, in one way or the other. Some showed bruising, and others sported cuts over their bodies as they fought desperately against the threat. She looked around and saw what seemed to be one of the villains sent to attack. The villain's face seemed to be twisted in agony and pain, and nearly every tooth in his mouth was shattered as he lay unconscious on the ground. But the real danger was the creature rampaging in the forest. Tokoyami's dark shadow had completely engulfed him and was going wild, thrashing about uncontrollably. Dark shadow seemed to be in a mindless frenzy, tearing down anything in its path. Trees snapped like twigs, and the ground shook with each movement. Izuku, who seemed to have sustained an injury on his arm, leapt and dodged with his speed, but the shadow claws kept coming faster than he could react. Todoroki, using his ice quirk to create barriers, found them shattering almost immediately as dark shadow tore through them. Shoji's many arms swung wide, trying to grab hold of the creature, but the beast was too powerful, and his efforts were futile. Rah! Dark shadow's roar echoed across the forest, its claws ripping through the trees, chasing after Izuku, who barely evaded a swipe. Dark shadow roared into the night. "BLD. Give me more. I am not finished yet." Izuku's body was still sore from the fight with Moonfish, but he pushed himself to his limit, shouting out, "Tokoyami, get a handle on Dark Shadow." Tokoyami gritted his teeth, his body shuddering under the influence of the chaos. "I'm trying but it's too strong," he called out, voice strained. Dark Shadow ignored Tokoyami's plea, focusing entirely on attacking the others. Blossom, still holding on to Kirishima, took in the scene with a tense gaze. Kirishima muttered, "CRP, this isn't good." Blossom nodded grimly and said, "Let's go." Without waiting for a response, they flew off, darting through the air and landing at the center of the battle. With a fierce look in her eyes, she gathered her energy and blasted it at Dark Shadow, pushing the beast back with a powerful wave of force. The monstrous creature staggered, momentarily losing its footing, and the attack gave everyone a small window of respite. They all turned to look at her. "Blossom!" Izuku exclaimed, a tone of relief in his voice. Todoroki, though clearly exhausted, shouted out, "Blossom, what are you doing? You can't just." Blossom walked toward the dark mass of energy, her face hard and focused. Todoroki, struggling to maintain his balance as he used his ice quirk, stood in her path, his left side already showing signs of overuse. "What are you doing? You can't just..." Blossom cut him off, her voice cold. "Why haven't you used your fire side, Todoroki?" Todoroki hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He didn't respond immediately, but Blossom pressed him further. "Why haven't you used your fireplace, when it could clearly stop this mess?" She glared at him, her frustration obvious. Todoroki's gaze wavered, a flash of internal conflict crossing his features. Before he could reply, Dark Shadow, enraged, lunged at them once more. With a loud roar, the claws came down, aiming straight for Blossom. But with no hesitation, she fired off another telekinetic blast, pushing the creature back once again. Blossom turned to Todoroki and said, her voice cutting through the tension, "If your stupid grudge against your father is so important that you'd let people die, then you have no business being a hero. Much less have this power." Her words struck a chord with Todoroki, his breath hitching as he clenched his fist. He stood frozen for a moment, torn between his emotions and his duty. Then, just as Dark Shadow lunged again, something changed. A flicker of light shot from Todoroki's left side, his fire side igniting in a blaze. His eyes narrowed in determination, and the flames surged upward, brighter and hotter than before. The light from his flames illuminated the forest, forcing Dark Shadow to recoil. Whoosh! The beast, now under the influence of the light, shrank back, its size diminishing and its roar turning into a frightened whimper. The force of Todoroki's flames pushed forward, the light causing Dark Shadow to shrink further. The once powerful creature now cowered, unable to fight against the light and heat. With the creature subdued, Tokoyami dropped to his knees, panting heavily, his body trembling from the exertion. Finally he breathed out, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, we should be thanking you," Todoroki muttered, his breath steady, glancing over the fallen villain. "You stopped that guy from causing Midoriya and me more problems." Blossom, having walked over, Kirishima in tow, stopped beside Tokoyami. She looked down at him, her expression softening. "Are you alright?" Todoroki asked her, taking note of the state she was in for the first time. Her clothes were torn, her body covered in dirt, but funny enough, no bruises were visible. Even though he knew that she was from a fight. Blossom nodded silently, her eyes flickering toward Tokoyami. "It wasn't your fault," she said quietly. Dark Shadow seemed to have been a bit carried away. Tokoyami looked down at his shaking hands, guilt clouding his thoughts. I almost killed all of you. How can I be a hero if I can't even control my own quirk?" Blossom placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "It's not about perfection, trust me," she said softly. "We all struggle. What matters is that you learn from this situation." As Tokoyami looked up, he gave a small nod, the weight of his own guilt beginning to lift. "Thank you," he whispered. Suddenly, a telepathic message rang out in the minds of everyone except Blossom. It was Mandalay's voice, clear but urgent. "Everyone who has not yet made it back to the inn, your homeroom teacher, Mr. Aizawa, has given you XPLCT permission to use your quirks to defend yourself and get back to camp safely. The villains are targeting certain people, and unfortunately they have taken Bakugou." Izuku gasped, his eyes widening in shock, his voice barely a whisper, "No Kaken." Blossom turned to him, confusion written on her face. "What's wrong?" Kirishima clenched his fists, those villains, shaking with a mix of fury and fear. His voice was unsteady. "They were able to capture Bakugou." The telepathic message continued, cutting through the tension. "Everyone. You have to make your way back to the inn. Authorities have been contacted, so you must get to safety." The link was abruptly cut, and the weight of the message hung heavily in the air. Izuku's voice broke through the silence, his desperation clear. "We have to go, we have to save Bakugou." His gaze was fixed ahead, his heart racing. Todoroki shook his head, trying to stay calm but his frustration evident. Didn't you hear what Mandalay said? We need to get back to the inn and stay safe. I know what she said. Izuku interrupted, his voice sharp with urgency. But we can't just leave Kaken with those villains. Blossom's voice cut in, firm and resolute. Izuku, we have to leave. It's not safe here. We need to get to safety before. Funny, coming from you. Kirishima shot her a look, anger flaring in his eyes. Your sisters are still out here. And what about that guy you were fighting with? You're going to face him, huh? He said in an accusatory tone that shocked the others. Blossom narrowed her eyes, surprised by his outburst. Kirishima. What is going on? Shoji spoke up, his voice full of confusion. What are you guys arguing about? Blossom didn't have time for more questions. We don't have time, guys. She looked at each of them, her voice growing urgent. We have to get out of here before, suddenly, she felt a shudder rip through the air, and before she could react, a voice echoed from above. You know, should have listened to the coward. Everyone looked up, and there, looming in the sky above them, was Brick. He grinned down at them with a smug look. Let's see how well you do now. With a feral grin, Brick dove straight toward them. Blossom's instincts kicked in immediately. Get down. She shouted, her arms glowing pink as she spread them wide, using her telekinesis to push the others to the ground and out of harm's way. Brick took advantage of the opening and came down with an axe kick aimed straight at her. Blossom blocked it, gritting her teeth, but before she could recover, he twisted mid-air and slammed a haymaker into her face. The force of the punch sent her flying into the trees, her body crashing against them with a sickening thud. She hit the ground, dazed and struggling to catch her breath. Brick smirked down at her. Pathetic, he muttered, watching her struggle to rise. Hey! Kirishima roared in defiance, catching Brick's attention. Having managed to get back on his feet quickly. Brick turned his head slightly, unamused. What's this now? Kirishima clenched his fists, his voice tight with fury. Why don't you pick on somebody your own size? He threw a hardened punch, aimed at Guy's face. Brick didn't even flinch. With ease, he caught Kirishima's punch in his palm. A smirk spread across Brick's face as he shook his head. Sorry, but you're less than nothing compared to her. Wait GAH. Brick unleashed a flurry of punches, each one landing with sickening force. The first punch slammed into Kirishima's stomach, the second into his ribs, and the third an uppercut to his jaw knocked the wind out of him, sending a spray of BLD and spit into the air. Kirishima's body went limp, collapsing to the ground, knocked out cold. Shoji's eyes widened in horror, his voice a frantic scream. Kirishima. Brick, uncaring, grabbed Kirishima by the neck and lifted him up like a ragdoll. His cold voice murmured, I don't see what she sees in this one. Blossom, her vision swimming from the blow to her face, managed to push herself up just enough to see what Brick had done. Her heart pounded as she saw Kirishima dangling lifelessly in Brick's grip. Without thinking, Blossom's hand shot out, a blast of pink energy erupting from her palm. Let him go, she shouted, her voice full of fury. Actually no, Brick mockingly considered her demand. Come and get your boyfriend, if you can. And with that, Brick took off into the sky, Kirishima still dangling from his hand, leaving Blossom staring after them, her breath coming in ragged gasps. No. Blossom gasped, her heart sinking. Without a moment's hesitation, she shot into the air, following after Brick with all the speed she could muster. Tokoyami and Shoji shouted her name, their voices filled with desperation, but Blossom was already gone, chasing after Brick with everything she had. Left behind, the others stood there, confusion and disbelief etched on their faces. What the heck is happening? Izuku muttered, trying to process everything that had just occurred. Todoroki's face was hard to read, but his eyes flickered with uncertainty. What now? We're losing everyone. Izuku clenched his fists, the urgency in his eyes never fading. We have to go. We need to find Kaken. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. It was unmistakably Uraraka's voice. Izuku's heart clenched, and without a second thought, he shouted, "We have to go." Uraraka and Tsu must be in trouble, already running toward the sound of her scream, with Todoroki, Shoji, and Tokoyami following closely behind. They plunged into the woods. Uraraka and Tsuyu. Uraraka quickly covered the slash on her arm and stepped back, standing beside Tsu. "Ochako, is your arm okay?" Tsu asked, hands up to shield her friend. "Yeah, I'm fine, it's just a scratch," she replied, keeping her guard. Shallow, not much. I'm going to need a lot more than this." Toga mumbled, staring at the small smear of BLD on her knife. What kind of JRK comes out swinging with a knife like that? Tsu, tongue flicked out, her voice turning cautious, as she addressed the stranger. "Who the heck are you?" "I'm Toga. And you two are really cute." Toga introduced herself without a care as her golden eyes looked at the two. Uraraka and Azui, she pointed the knife at each of them in turn, and squealed at that. The two, although, looked fearful at the knowledge she had. "How does she know our names?" Uraraka questioned, not liking this. "Could be through the sports festival, and that is bad, seeing as we don't know anything about her." "Stay on guard," she cautiously said. Suddenly, Toga was looking around as if she were looking for something or someone, which made both girls confused. "Oh, well, if you don't mind, I'll just take a little more of that BLD from you now." Saying that, she reached into her tool belt and pulled out a syringe attached to a long tube. "BLD? What the heck kind of thing is that to ask for?" Tsu shot back, narrowing her large eyes. Her tongue flicked out, her voice turning serious as she instinctively stood in a more defensive posture. Toga, clearly smiling behind her mask, was enjoying herself. "Don't worry. I just need enough to make you sleep for a long time," she said in a sing-song voice, lunging forward with eerie enthusiasm. "Look out!" Tsu shouted, wrapping her tongue around Uraraka's waist, throwing her out of the way as Toga charged toward them. "Uraraka, you have to make it back to camp. We don't know who else they are looking for, but we have permission to use our quirks for defense." Uraraka looked down at her friend and yelled, "Tsu! Get back! Tag!" Tsu, seeing the attack, managed to jump away just in time, but the knife nicked her tongue, drawing BLD, "Ow," she muttered to herself, tongue out. Tsu, Toga turned around, taking off her mask to give a blushing smile. "What a cute nickname. I think I'll call you that too," she declared. "Nope, only my friends get to call me that." Tsu shot back and hopped backwards. "Not so fast." Toga snickered, her eyes glittering with madness as she spun around. She tossed her syringe, sending it toward Tsuyu. The blade shot into her hair, propelled her, and struck her into the tree, keeping her from getting away. "Ooh, what a shot, haha." Toga giggled, drawing another knife from her belt. "I was always the best at darts, and now I hit a target I can't see. Yay! This is the best day ever. I got to meet more new friends." Toga walked up close to Tsu, knife raised towards her face. "Oh, I do love hanging out with you, but," she leaned closer, Tsu tried her best not to show fear, "I really wanted to meet my other friend, Bubbles." She pouted with a hint of childish disappointment, her eyes drifting toward the sky as she added, "But I guess she's busy, huh?" "Be Bubbles?" Tsuyu asked, her voice tinged now with confusion. "Why do you?" Toga didn't give her time to finish before happily saying, "Anyway, how about I take that BLD now?" "Get away from her!" Uraraka shouted, her fear turning into a surge of anger. She rushed at Toga, throwing herself into the fray. To her surprise, her body seemed to react on its own, remembering her training. She dodged an incoming knife with ease, grabbed Toga's wrist, and swiftly flipped the villain onto the ground, pinning her down with surprising strength. Toga let out a small yelp of surprise but immediately chuckled, her eyes filled with dark amusement. "Wow," she whispered, clearly impressed. "That was cute." Uraraka turned to Tsu, "Are you okay? Are you able to use your tongue to restrain her?" Tsu, still wincing from the pain, said, "Give me a while and I'll dash." She was cut off by the manic giggles of Toga. Wrenching on Toga's wrist, Uraraka growled, "You're not getting any BLD from us." But Toga only laughed softly beneath her. Uraraka, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice calm yet unsettling. "You have someone special you like, don't you?" Uraraka's heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down her spine. She froze for a moment, her grip tightening. "What are you talking about?" she managed to say, the question making her uneasy. Toga's smile widened as she continued, her voice taking on an eerie tone. "I can tell you're just like me. You like someone so much that you end up acting like them. Doing things that they do just so you can try and get them to notice you." Uraraka felt her breath hitch as Toga continued, her gaze unwavering. "I can't help but love people who are all bloodied and cut up. It drives me crazy, and I can't stop thinking about them. I love it so much I end up carving up anyone to make them look like who I want. I want to see their BLD all over, and I can't ever get enough." Uraraka shuddered, the words crawling under her skin as Toga's twisted view of love took hold of the air around them. Her heart raced with both fear and confusion as the words swirled in her mind. Suddenly, a sharp pain stabbed through her leg, and she let out a startled scream, looking down in horror as Toga had stuck another syringe into her thigh. "Achiko!" Tsuyu shouted in distress as she tried to free herself, struggling with the syringe pinning her hair to the tree. SCK, Toga hummed in pleasure as the BLD started to flow into her storage canister, an unsettling glint in her eye. She shivered as she savored the sensation. Uraraka gritted her teeth, the sharp pain from the needle only increasing, but she knew she had to hold on. "Uraraka!" All the girls looked up to see Tsu leaping through the air straight towards the pair on the ground. Seeing she had no choice, Toga forced through the grip on her body and broke free, jumping out of the way just before Shoji could grab her. Leaping into the bushes, Toga grunted in annoyance, seeing the other teens approaching from behind. "There's quite a lot now. Looks like I should be heading back now." And left into the shadows. "Achiko, are you okay?" Tsu asked, finally getting herself free. "Why yeah, I'm okay." Uraraka nodded as she looked at the others, her eyes shooting open in horror when she saw Izuku's condition. "Deku. What happened?" "I'm okay, don't worry," Izuku forced a chuckle as she approached. "But we have to go now. Kaken needs our help." "What? I still don't you understand," Uraraka winced as Tsu checked her arm. "Wasn't he supposed to be with Aizawa?" "We know, but they found a way to catch him." Izuku yelled out in concern. "If we can get them now, we can at least get him before they go." "Alright, but where's Tokoyami?" Uraraka tilted her head in confusion. "Wasn't he supposed to be with you, Shoji?" "What do you mean?" Shoji turned around to the group behind him. "Tokoyami is right he wasn't. Don't worry. Your friends will be joining our special event." All of the students looked up to the branches above to see a tall man in a yellow raincoat with a white mask and a top hat on his head. The man chuckled as he spun a small cane in his hand. "I took him with my magic. Talented kids like him would be wasting their potential as a hero. We will give him a grander stage to show what he can really do." "Took him." Izuku then noticed the small marble bouncing in the man's hand, realizing he must have captured him with some kind of transformation quirk. "Give him back." Mr. Compress tilted his head in surprise. "Give him? Is he a piece of property to control? I think that's the problem with you kids these days. Thinking you can tell others what to do." "What?" Todoroki turned around and saw she was right. How the hell, what kind of quirk is that? I saw what your bird friend did to Moonfish. Compress shifted his hand around. While he wasn't the brightest, he was, in fact, a death row inmate. It would be interesting to see what a little freedom could do for him as well. Let him go. Todoroki yelled and slammed his right foot onto the ground, unleashing a barrage of ice up towards the tree. Casually evading it, Compress jumped behind the glacier and leaped through the treetops. It's such a shame all of you kids choose to waste yourselves at this useless school. Perhaps these two and maybe a special girl can show you all what it's like to be yourself for once, he taunted, before shoving the marble in his pocket. Come on, we can't let him get away. Izuku screamed out and chased after him with the others close behind. As they ran, however, they saw this man's agility was much more significant than theirs and was slowly gaining ground over them. We can't lose him. Watching the villain get further away, Izuku growled out in frustration, seeing they were close to losing him now. Suddenly, he saw a green light going off in the distance. And he suddenly felt a cold realization of what might happen, and this guy would lead them there. He knew if they were going to catch this guy, they would have to be much faster. We won't catch him like this. We need you to throw us, Izuku said. What? What are you talking about? Uraraka questioned. Izuku, however, skidded to a stop. Uraraka, you need to lighten us so Tsu can throw us straight at him. When we are close, release your quirk so we can get him to the ground, he quickly explained. Tsu, though unsure, just nodded, getting into position. Izuku felt his chest tighten as he, Shoji, and Todoroki were wrapped in Tsu's tongue. He desperately wanted to get to Buttercup and make sure she was safe, but if he left Bakugou and Tokoyami to be captured, he could never look at himself with any respect. He had to help them. He nodded as Uraraka came up and touched both of them, removing their gravity. And make sure you get them back. Uraraka yelled out before they were launched into the sky. Waha! Izuku yelped out in shock as they were catapulted into the air, flying after the leaping villain. After a few moments, they were heading to a very shocked Mr. Compress, who turned around just as they slammed into his back. The atmosphere around Buttercup was thick with darkness, like a suffocating blanket of shadows. Her emerald glow cut through the oppressive blackness, her body lighting up like a beacon as she soared through the air, her grip tight around the unconscious ragdoll on her back. She was desperately dodging, weaving through the area as dark tendrils lash out, and something in the shadows twisted and writhed, reaching for her, only to be met with another evasive roll or flip as she shot through the murky space. She muttered under her breath, her tone full of frustration. DMN it, will he just stop already? The tendrils came faster, sharper, like jagged claws trying to latch onto her. The darkness was alive, pulsating, and chaotic. Still, Buttercup wasn't about to slow down. The wind whipped around her, her aura growing brighter as she pushed herself to her limits. Her mind raced. But it was the voice of the ragdoll on her back that caught her attention. Just go, leave me here and get away, the ragdoll whispered weakly, a faint tremor in their voice. Buttercup's brow furrowed in anger. She shook her head fiercely. Not a chance, she spat, I ain't leaving you with him. Her grip on the ragdoll tightened as she zoomed ahead, narrowly avoiding another strike from the shadowy tendrils. Suddenly, she was cut off by a familiar, taunting voice. Now, Buttercup, Butch's voice echoed from the darkness, smooth, mocking. Why would you want to leave? The shadows seemed to ripple around her as Butch materialized from the blackness. His body was a dark silhouette, his grin wicked as his glowing eyes, black with dark green accents, locked onto her. His hands were raised, radiating the same sinister energy as his eyes, filling the air with an ominous hum. The ground around him trembled slightly with each movement. Butch chuckled to himself, muttering something about playing with her and how it wouldn't be long now. Buttercup shot a furious glare at him, her eyes flashing with fury. Without hesitation, she raised her free hand and fired a green beam of energy at him, but it passed right through him, dissipating harmlessly in the air. A frustrated growl escaped her throat. "Where are you?" she shouted, anger boiling beneath her words. "Let me out of here." Her voice echoed, but the darkness seemed to press in tighter, and no answer came from Butch, only the soft murmur of his twisted laughter. Outside, the true Butch stood, still smiling like a predator toying with its prey. His blackened eyes gleamed with malicious delight, and his hands were still raised, manipulating the shadows around Buttercup. But as his twisted thoughts played out, a voice cut through the tension. "What the hell are you doing?" Dabi stepped forward, his usual no-nonsense attitude clear. "Stop messing around and get that beach contained." "Relax, Scarface." Butch didn't even glance at Dabi, waving him off dismissively. "She's not so easy to drain." Dabi's eyes narrowed, but he sighed in annoyance, turning his gaze up toward the stars. His sharp eyes caught something moving in the distance, something large, something coming their way. "Huh," he murmured under his breath, focusing. The ground shook as Shoji, Izuku, and Todoroki crashed into the clearing, their landing sending a shockwave through the forest floor. Dust billowed out around them, but it wasn't just the impact that caught their attention, it was the eerie black haze hovering nearby, like a living storm cloud anchored to the earth. "What is that?" Shoji asked, tension tightening his stance as his multiple arms extended defensively. Todoroki's eyes narrowed. "That's not normal fog, it looks wrong." Before they could say anything else, a sudden roar of blue fire erupted from the treeline. "Get down!" Todoroki shouted, immediately throwing up a thick ice barrier. The wall barely formed before a massive blast of blue flames slammed into it, vaporizing it in a second. The raw heat scorched the ground and trees around them, forcing the trio to dive for cover as the inferno exploded just overhead. Smoke rose as Dabi stepped out, nonchalant and smirking. "Eesh, you kids are becoming a real pain in the butt," he muttered, eyes settling directly on Todoroki. "Especially you." Todoroki tensed, his eyes locking onto the flame-scarred man. There was something about him, his fire, his voice, but he couldn't place it. Still, the venom in Dabi's gaze felt personal. Meanwhile, from a flash of light, Mr. Compress reappeared, tumbling from a marble onto the ground like a showman returning to the stage. "Well, that was quite close to the sleeve," he chuckled, brushing dust off his coat. He turned to the heroes, twirling 2 marbles between his fingers with a flourish. "I dare say your rescue attempt is adorable, but tragically misguided." Izuku's heart sank. He must have them, Kaken and Tokoyami, he thought, eyes narrowing in determination. "We have time," Mr. Compress raised a hand and gestured mockingly. "Why not test your mettle, children? Come and get them." Todoroki launched a wave of ice at Dabi, who met it with searing blue flames. The forest lit up in brilliant contrast, ice cracking and fire roaring, the 2 elements locked in a vicious clash. At the same time, Izuku and Shoji rushed at Mr. Compress. Izuku surged forward with One for All, blinking from step to step, but Mr. Compress dodged with theatrical flair, his coat swirling around him as he evaded every strike with ease. "Too slow," he taunted. "And here I thought the next generation of heroes might offer more of a challenge." Shoji extended his arms wide, trying to grab him from both sides, but Compress spun into a backflip, landing lightly on one foot. "Bravo! A valiant effort." As Izuku caught his breath, something shifted at a distance. A shadow loomed, and when he turned, there was another being stepping out of the dark fog. A being, muscular, arms crossed, eyes full of mockery. His dark green energy, familiar in a way, pulsed around his one hand, similar to that of the miasma. "So," he said with a lopsided smirk, "you're the chump Buttercup's been wasting her time with, huh?" Izuku blinked, confused. "You know Buttercup?" Butch snorted. "Oh, I know her. Was actually my first kiss." "What?" That hit harder than expected. Looking at him, Butch pointed casually toward the shadowy storm. "She and the cat lady are indisposed. As you can see." Izuku followed his gesture to the swirling darkness, and Buttercup's green glow was faintly flickering in the area. No, he breathed. Izuku's heart thudded in his chest, jaw clenched. Give her back. Anger burst through him, and he lunged forward, only for Butch to sidestep effortlessly, chuckling. Cute. Butch leapt into the air, floating above him with zero effort. Izuku's eyes widened. He can fly. Izuku questioned, but shook his head, not wanting to waste time. He looked in the direction of the dark fog and, without thinking, Izuku leapt into the miasma, only to be instantly caught by snapping dark tendrils, binding his arms midair. What the? He shouted, struggling. Butch's laughter echoed. Not so fast, nerd. Having the one controlling the dark tendrils around the boy. Suddenly, a surge of black energy rippled from the tendrils and struck Izuku's body. He screamed out in pain, electricity-like pulses racking his body. Inside the miasma, Buttercup heard the cry. She snapped her gaze up, barely dodging another tentacle. Her eyes flashed green as she activated a detection pulse, her vision pushed through the haze, spotting the chaos outside. Todoroki was locked in combat with the scarred fire guy. Shoji was darting after a masked villain. Izuku. Her heart dropped. Izuku was losing against Butch. And to make matters worse, the tentacles wrapped around her again, this time successfully snatching Ragdoll from her back. "No," she shouted, green flaring wildly. But her body was starting to give, her aura flickering, her limbs heavy from the constant strain. Back outside, Izuku was on the ground, gasping, bleeding, too battered to stand. Butch hovered above him, arms crossed lazily. "You're nothing," Butch spat, his tone scornful. "Kinda sad someone as pretty as her hangs around with trash like you." Izuku's eyes burned with fury. But his body wouldn't respond, it tingled weirdly, painfully. Then, suddenly, familiar dark portals opened around the area, and everyone froze. Dabi's smirk widened. Well. Looks like our match has been postponed." He turned toward Todoroki and unleashed another blazing jet of fire, stronger, hotter than before. Todoroki barely managed to counter, flames clashing with flames, but Dabi's power overwhelmed him, blasting him backwards into a tree. The bark cracked, and he hit the ground with a thud. "Todoroki!" Shoji shouted. Mr. Compress landed gracefully beside Dabi, offering a mock bow. A riveting performance, as always. Dabi ignored him, eyes narrowing. He called out to Butch, "Enough. Wrap it up." Butch huffed, clearly annoyed. Yeah, girls are down." With a wave of his hand, the miasma peeled away, revealing the aftermath. A hulking Nomu stood in the center. It had a very large, muscular build similar to the one at the USJ, but with mint green skin. He wore black trousers ripped just above his kneecaps, and a brown belt. And as the previous Nomu, his brain is exposed, but most of it seemed to be protected by a shiny, purple helmet with 2 red visors and a metal GG. The most defining feature about him is the 6 retractable arms that protrude from its back, each having a construction tool coming out of it. 2 of its arms were holding the unconscious forms of Ragdoll and Buttercup. Izuku both screamed, "No." But his legs wouldn't move, his body was too battered, and his energy was spent. As the villains began to make their escape, swirling portals opening around them like ominous vortexes in the sky, Mr. Compress stepped toward one, marbles in hand, his posture confident as ever. "Not so fast, magician guy." The voice rang out sharply, and a green energy beam sliced through the air and slammed into Mr. Compress's side. He let out a grunt of surprise as the force sent him stumbling backward, the precious marbles slipping from his grasp and spinning into the air. All eyes turned skyward as the small spheres shimmered. Without Compress's consciousness to maintain the effect, they began to revert. Dabi clicked his tongue in frustration, watching helplessly as the transformation took hold. One of the marbles exploded into light, revealing a stunned bakugou mid-air, still dazed from his confinement. Dabi didn't hesitate. He lunged forward and grabbed the boy by the neck before he could react. "Don't even think about trying to flee," Dabi growled, fire crackling dangerously near his palm. The second marble unraveled next, revealing Tokoyami. The bird-headed teen gasped, trying to orient himself, only to be shielded by a sudden, thick wall of ice. CRP. Dabi spun around, eyes narrowing. Across the battlefield, Buttercup stood tall, her green aura flickering but alive. Her eyes burned with fierce defiance as she stared Dabi down. Todoroki's breath hitched. "She's awake." Izuku's heart surged. "Buttercup." Butch's smirk widened from nearby. "I knew she had more juice left in her." He muttered, "I thought so." Dabi didn't waste time. "You stupid beast, restrain her." The Nomu obeyed, its 6 monstrous arms rising. 2 of them, fitted with a hammer and a spinning drill, swung down toward Buttercup with the intent to knock her out. She reacted instantly, blasting them away with a focused surge of green energy. The Nomu reeled back, and Buttercup flew straight for it, snatching Ragdoll from its grasp with impressive agility. "No!" Dabi shouted, flames rising around him in frustration. Izuku and the others, still trapped behind the chaos, called out to her. "Go, Buttercup!" Shoji shouted. "Get back here, now!" Izuku yelled, struggling to rise to his feet. Buttercup glanced skyward. Something caught her attention, movement in the clouds, a faint glint of light. Her thoughts flashed back to Butch's warning. She knew what was coming. "Bubbles, heads up and protect," she yelled out, and without hesitation, she hurled Ragdoll into the air. Gasps rang out. "What is she thinking?" Todoroki cried. Butch's eyes widened as he shot forward to catch Ragdoll, only to halt midair, barely dodging a flurry of blue bubbles. "The hell," he spat, twisting midair. Above him, Bubbles hovered, her eyes narrowed, her aura pulsing with power. She cradled Ragdoll in one arm and scowled down at Butch. Buttercup looked up and shouted, "Go! Now!" Then she flew back toward the others, landing hard and slamming her fists into the ground, sending a rippling pulse of energy out. A shimmering blue force field erupted around her and the others, shielding them from incoming attacks. Izuku ran to the edge of the barrier. But what about her? Before Buttercup could answer, a voice whispered behind her. "Too slow." Her eyes widened, but before she could react, a shimmering bubble materialized around her, cutting her off from the others. She pounded against it, green light flashing with each strike, but it didn't crack. Outside the bubble, Butch watched with an annoyed face. "Took you long enough." Out of a puff of blue smoke, Boomer emerged, spinning a glowing finger. "What can I say? I was having fun. TCH, whatever." "Do it," Butch ordered flatly. Boomer's smile widened. With a snap of her fingers, the bubble surrounding Buttercup pulsed red. Sparks of energy began to gather, then with a sudden, violent surge, a blast of red lightning exploded inside. Buttercup screamed, the sound tore through the air, raw, blood-curdling. Everyone flinched. "No!" Izuku screamed, fists slamming into the barrier. Even Bubbles faltered, tears brimming in her eyes, but she kept the barrier up, jaw tight. After what felt like an eternity, the bubble winked out, leaving Buttercup's unconscious body crumpled on the ground. Butch walked over, barely sparing the others a glance, and slung her limp form over his shoulder. "Come on," he said, nodding to Boomer. "Let Brick know we're done." Dabi, his fury palpable, dragged the barely conscious Mr. Compress by the leg. Bakugou, still gripped by Dabi's flaming hand, was pulled along with them, scowling through the pain. Unable to move with his hand on his neck, Bakugou stared helplessly as he was slowly dragged into the mist. He stared right at Izuku's terrified face, unable to hide the fear on his own. "Stay back, Deku." Boomer hummed a cheery tune as he fired a beam of light into the air, before entering into the final portal. Later, losers, he grinned, stepping through and vanishing. And just like that, they were gone. The force field dropped. Izuku collapsed to his knees, shaking, eyes wide with horror as he stared at the spot where Buttercup had been. "Kaken," he choked out. "Buttercup." The wind howled around Blossom as she flew through the sky, the treetops whipping past below. Brick soared ahead, Kirishima limp in his grasp, his red hair flicking with the current of their speed. "Give him back." Blossom shouted, her voice raw with emotion, her hands glowing with radiant pink energy. Brick only glanced over his shoulder with a smug grin. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" He suddenly twisted to the side, effortlessly dodging a blast of telekinetic force Blossom hurled at him. Another pulse, a beam of compact energy, shot toward his flank, but he looped around it, weaving through the air like it was a game. "You'll have to try harder than that, Princess," he taunted, lazily spinning in the air before jetting off again. Blossom's chest tightened with frustration. She pushed herself harder, faster, teeth clenched. She couldn't let him get away, not with Kirishima. But then a faint scream carried through the wind to her ears, and the battle between them was like a blade. Her heart stopped. Her body froze in midair. "Buttercup," she whispered, breath catching. There was no mistaking that voice. It had been hers. And it hadn't been a battle cry. It was a scream of agony. Then she saw it, a beam of blue energy shot up into the sky from deep within the forest below. Brick saw it too. He slowed midair, turning to look, and then he laughed, a cruel, triumphant sound that chilled her to her core. Well, he drawled. "Looks like we caught our prey." Blossom's lips parted, trembling. "No." Brick looked back at her, grinning. "Well, girlie, I'd say it was nice seeing you again," his eyes narrowed, "but I'd be lying." And then, he dropped Kirishima. Blossom screamed and dove, her body cutting through the air like a missile. She reached out, heart thundering in her chest, and just before he hit the trees, she caught him. Her arms wrapped tightly around him, her powers cushioning the impact as she hovered just above the forest floor, cradling his limp body. Above, "I hope that boyfriend of yours was worth it," Brick's voice echoed one last time, laced with mocking malice. "Because him is going to welcome your abandoned sister." And then flames engulfed his form, licking up his body before he vanished into smoke, gone, but his laughter lingering like poison in the air. Blossom remained suspended, her arms tightening around Kirishima. She flew toward the source of the scream. Then she saw them. Bubbles stood in a clearing with a few other classmates and Ragdoll near her. Her shoulders were hunched, arms wrapped protectively around herself. The moment she looked up and saw Blossom, her tears spilled freely, and she shook her head slowly. No words. Just despair. Blossom was still in the air, still holding Kirishima. She looked at the damage around her in the forest, the trees now scorched by blue and red flames, and smoke entering the sky. Her friends, bruised and hurt. And the absence of the one person who should have been here with them. Her eyes lowered to Kirishima, still unconscious, then rose again to the scarred sky above. Suddenly, snow seemed to form around her. "You are going to be sorry. UA." A few days had passed since the attack on the training camp, and the outcome was far from ideal. In the aftermath, 28 students were affected, some injured, others unconscious, and several were in critical condition. Of the 6 pro heroes on site, 2 had sustained serious injuries. They were now in recovery, but safe. However, the worst blow came from the abduction of 2 students, a devastating failure that cast a dark shadow over UA's reputation. News outlets pounced on the incident, forcing the school to shut its doors temporarily while the full extent of the damage was assessed. Outside the closed front gates of UA, it had become a war zone of their own, not of fists and quirks, but of questions and flashing cameras. A crowd of reporters swarmed the perimeter, their lenses trained on the towering walls, some even standing on crates or shoulders just to get a better view beyond the barriers. Microphones were moved between the metal doors, voices clashing over one another in an unrelenting barrage of inquiries. Why won't the school release a statement? 2 students are missing, what are you hiding? Is it true the League of Villains knew about the training camp? What are you afraid of, UA? The truth? A few security personnel stood by the gates, arms crossed, visibly strained from holding the crowd back. Behind them, police tape flapped weakly in the breeze, a grim reminder of how far things had escalated. One reporter, more aggressive than the rest, banged a fist against the gate's iron bars. We deserve answers. The public deserves answers. Another cameraman panned upward toward the imposing silhouette of the school, his voiceover echoing with urgency. Once the premier institution for hero education, UA now finds itself at the center of controversy and criticism. Inside the school, in the board office, a meeting was taking place. Principal Nizu, sitting at the head of the table, was facing the group in front of him. The teachers sat in silence as they stared at the small principal. He sighed, this is certainly not the situation any of us could have expected. He quietly said out loud. It's a mess. We've got multiple injured students, and worse, 2 have been taken. Cementos added. Nizu nodded grimly. The villains clearly watched our students closely. I suspect they targeted the ones who stood out most during the attack, he trailed off, clearly disturbed by the implications. 13 leaned forward, her gloved hand supporting her weight as she sighed. Bakugou's temper is no secret, his behavior at the sports festival might have made him a prime target. As for the girl, I have my theories. But I'd like to hear yours first. Aizawa stood slowly, his tone low and focused. From what I gathered and what we were told by the other students, the villain's objective was also set on capturing her or her sisters. The reason, I am not sure why yet. He shot a glance at Midnight and Nizu but continued, but my theory is that they most likely wish to try and convert them both to join their side. If that happens, it would be the end of UA as we know it. Hearing that, Midnight's fist clenched tighter under desk, but kept a leveled head. Snipe sat forward, brows furrowed. But why Buttercup? Yes, her abilities are impressive and she is strong, but she's also just a child. We all forget that they are all children at the end of the day. And they are more than that, announced Recovery Girl. I believe they must have already found out about the girl's healing abilities. Shooting an accusing look at Aizawa. That kind of ability, the edge to her quirk. That kind of fire draws attention that we don't want for our kids. Grunting, Snipe rubbed the back of his head. There haven't been any ransom demands made by the League, so that must be the reason. Why go through all the effort to capture students alive if you aren't negotiating for anything? They're not after hostages, Vlad King said darkly. They're after recruits. There is something I need to say, and I am sure all of you are thinking it as well. Present Mike looked up to the others, his normally grinning face hard and angry. There's a traitor here at this school. While the others' eyes widened at his words, Mike sat up, his frustration rising. Only the teachers and the pussycats knew where the camp was taking place, and yet the villains somehow know where to find them. Who knows, maybe a student even tipped the League off and dash. Are we really going to this? Blaming a student? Midnight cut in, voice sharp. That's where you want to go with this? What's so crazy about it, Midnight turned to Aizawa speaking. We have to go over every possible contingency, and right now, anyone could be a likely suspect. For someone who rants about being logical and stuff like that, you are not really showing that now, show Yuta, Midnight retorts, an edge to her comment. 13 spoke up, in any case, we can't be throwing accusations around, willy-nilly like that, you too. Talking about Aizawa and Mike, by that logic, anyone here could be the traitor, and if that's the case, can we all give a 100% guarantee that we are not the enemy? The table was once again brought to silence. No one really knew what to say to that, or rather, they knew they couldn't refute it. Though Recovery Girl was not saying outward, she was having her theories about there being a mole, or something of that nature. When she later found out that the tired-looking buffoon blabbed about her protégé's ability, she speculated that it might have added more of a target on the girl. Honestly, if wasn't for the Hippocratic oath, the youthful hero would have strangled that idiot. Toshinori sat quietly, not bothering to add anything to the discussion, as he held his head in frustration at the entire situation. Firstly, he was filled with guilt, furious he wasn't there to help protect the students from harm. After hearing Midoriya's injuries, though not a threat to his capabilities of being a hero, he couldn't help but feel responsible for it all, since the villains attacking the school in the first place were all because of him. He also couldn't help also wonder that something was off about the report, relating to the way the villains targeted the students, or rather, a specific three. Nizu finally spoke up. In any case, 13 is right. This is not the time or place to be tearing each other down. Rather, we are to band together to form a plan on how we are to handle this situation. He sighed once more before continuing. At the very least, I trust everyone at this table, as I request the very same thing. The words were meant to settle the unease, but they hung in the air like smoke, fragile and difficult to breathe through. Trust works both ways, Aizawa muttered, almost too low to hear. Nizu's ear twitched subtly, catching the remark, but he said nothing. We've gone over what we can for now, Nizu said, folding his paws. Until we receive more from the authorities or any updates on our missing students, we will move forward carefully. Stay vigilant, but stay compassionate. We owe them that. There was a collective, weary nod from the staff. I appreciate your time. You are dismissed, he said, before turning to glance at one of his teachers. Oh, and Nemuri, please stay behind, I would like to have a talk with you, he requested, a tinge of concern in it. Midnight was surprised by this but knew the reason for the talk and, quite frankly, wanted to talk too. Yes, of course, sir. She remained seated as one by one, the other teachers began rising from their seats and filing out, quiet footsteps echoing against the polished tile floors of the conference room. All Might gave a brief nod toward Nizu and left, lost in his own turmoil. Present Mike offered a last, sideways glance at her, but Aizawa said nothing, only giving a scrutinizing, disapproving glare at the principal. Aizawa's boots echoed loudly against the polished school hallway as he stormed through the corridors, the heavy weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. His mind was a maze of frustration and unanswered questions. The attack at the forest training camp still loomed large in his mind, and despite all the information they had gathered, something felt wrong. Those two know something. They must. His frustration boiled over as he walked, the unease gnawing at him. What are they not telling us? What are they hiding? His eyes narrowed as he tried to piece it all together. The connection between the villains and the girls, especially those two students, felt clearer now, but he couldn't quite place what it all meant. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something big, and yet the answers remained elusive. This is getting annoying. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a loud voice. Shuta-ah. The distinct voice of his friend called out, ringing through the hallway, cutting through Aizawa's thoughts like a knife. He turned to find his friend bounding toward him, his friend's usual energetic demeanor now replaced with something more serious. Mike, Aizawa muttered, a frown already creasing his forehead. What is it? Present Mike stopped in front of him, concern etched across his face. Hey, you good, man? You look like you're about to snap, he said, lowering his voice slightly. Aizawa gave a short, frustrated exhale. I'm fine, he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Just trying to figure this whole mess out. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The attack, the student something's off, and I can't put my finger on it. Present Mike tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't your fault, you know. The attack were teachers, Shoyuta. We can't be everywhere at once, and you did the best you could. Aizawa shook his head. Doesn't matter. I'm the teacher. The responsibility falls on me. The media's already hounding me, and they'll never let up, no matter how I handled it. It doesn't change anything. His voice grew low, his gaze dropping to the floor in frustration. Present Mike sighed, nodding slowly. Yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, we are responsible for the students. We have to carry that weight. Aizawa just gave a tired nod, about to turn and leave when Present Mike called out to him again. Show Yuta. Present Mick's voice was serious now. Do you really believe there's a traitor here at UA? Aizawa stopped, the question hanging in the air for a moment. He hesitated, his tired eyes scanning the hallway as he considered his response. His mind went back to the unease he'd felt over the past couple of months, the odd occurrences, the suspicious behaviors, the way things just didn't quite add up. His gaze shifted to Present Mike, and for a brief moment, Aizawa thought about telling him everything, the feelings of doubt, the subtle connections he was beginning to suspect between the three students, Nizu, Namuri, but no. He couldn't make an accusation without more proof. Not yet. Aizawa sighed heavily, rubbing a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of it all. Your theory has some merit, he muttered, his voice tinged with weariness. But we need more evidence before we start pointing fingers. I don't believe in acting on suspicion alone. We need to be cautious, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep our eyes open for anything that stands out. Alright, Present Mike didn't push further, but he couldn't help the serious undertone of Aizawa's words. The normally stoic teacher looked more tired than usual, more burdened than ever before. Before he could ask more, a voice called from behind. Aizawa. Vlad King rounded the corner, looking at Aizawa with a slightly exasperated expression. We've got more news reports this afternoon. Don't make me drag you to them. Aizawa grunted in response, already feeling the weight of his responsibilities pile up even more. Fine, he muttered. I'll be there. With that, Aizawa turned to leave, giving Present Mike a brief wave as he walked off. Present Mike, still standing there, sighed and called out one last time, trying to lighten the mood. Oh, and hey, sure, dude. Just don't lose your cool with those reports, alright? Aizawa didn't even glance back. I'll try, he said, his voice low, as he continued down the hall. Present Mike stood there for a moment, watching his friend walk away, the weight of everything pressing down on them both. His joke fell flat in the silence, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling lingering in the air. Once the soft, retreating footsteps of the teachers faded away, Nizu exhaled, turning toward his desk to rummage through his drawer. He clicked open the small compartment, searching for a tea set. As he did, he spoke casually, his voice almost as though trying to smooth over the tension that lingered in the room. Right. I believe you know why I called you in, Namuri. He pulled out a small kettle pot, a tea set with 2 cups, and set them on the desk with a precise, deliberate movement. Care for some tea? Midnight, who had been sitting back in her chair, watching him, let out a soft, knowing chuckle. You know, it's considered rude not to offer guests treats ahead of time, if you have them. Especially while we had a meeting like that. She couldn't help but grin slightly, her usual playful energy coming through despite the gravity of their earlier discussion. Nizu raised an eyebrow as he prepared the tea, a thoughtful look crossing his face. I always find it better to offer tea when tensions are higher than they need to be. Midnight smirked, taking a small sip of the offered tea. Oh, that little meeting we had wasn't too tense. She paused, glancing up at him. But I see your point. Nizu set the kettle down and finally met her gaze, his voice softer now. Not as tense as you have been feeling, until now. Midnight's smile faltered slightly, her shoulders slumping as she let out a sigh. She took another sip of the tea, letting its warmth settle inside her. For a long moment, the room fell into a quiet, almost reflective silence, save for the soft clinking of the cup in her hand. Finally, Nizu broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. I believe even with the situation at hand, you were able to contact the girls, were you not? Midnight exhaled slowly, leaning back slightly. Yes, I was good thing I am their Mo guardian, as well as a teacher to get the call through, she quickly corrected herself. Nizu's ears twitched at that, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked up from his tea. I see, not missing the little slip-up she did, but not wanting to pick just yet. Yes, she said, nodding slowly, her tone now getting even. From what I could get, they were unharmed physically but they didn't share much. Not directly. But gauging from what I could get from their tone, they are both not happy. Honestly, I wouldn't be so happy if one of my siblings were captured as well, and I had no idea how to find them. Nizu's eyes conveyed sympathy before they darkened subtly. He lifted his cup, taking a small sip. At any rate, the clues matches the report, he murmured. Too many elements lined up far too well. And not just the breach. The mention of targeting specific students, the way the attackers moved, it wasn't random. It seemed rehearsed. Midnight's brows furrowed. You think they knew about the girls? I think it's becoming harder to believe they didn't. Nizu set his cup down with an audible clink. True, all our students have quirks with great potential, but it is those girls who won't be missed. These villains came with a purpose, whether it was to shake us, try to recruit new people to their side, or garner some information. He paused, steepling his paws together. The girls could very well be at the top of their list. Midnight's tone took on more of a worried mother. That's what I don't like. They've already been through more than enough in whatever world they came from. If someone working with these villains knows even part of their past, what they've done, what they're capable of, then this whole attack could have been a layered strategy designed to expose them, gauge their reaction, maybe even draw them out. Nizu nodded slowly. I wouldn't count it as unlikely, understanding what the findings have revealed to us. The silence that followed was heavy. Midnight's fingers gripped her teacup tightly, her expression tight with concern. They don't even seem fazed, she said quietly. I understand that they said they went through maybe things like this, but they are still kids, her voice cracked just slightly. It's just strange. Nizu slowly sipped his tea, his gaze flicking over to her. As he observed her, he couldn't help but notice the almost motherly tone in her voice. The protective instinct was undeniable. The way she spoke about the girls, about their well-being, there was something deeply personal in it. It made Nizu pause. Is it right for her to feel this way, he thought to himself, a quiet unease rising in his chest. Have I made a mistake by allowing Nemuri to get this close to them? Should I have kept a safer distance, considering what's at stake here? Knowing who else may be vying for the girls. The question lingered, heavy in his mind, but he didn't voice it. Instead, he let out a small sigh, setting his cup down. Unknown bar. The bar was thick with the stench of alcohol, smoke, and sweat, the hum of static from a busted TV spitting out news coverage of their latest chaos. Everyone was winding down in their own way, twice muttering half of a joke to himself while also admonishing himself on it not being funny, Spinner half asleep on a stool, and Toga swirling BLD around in a glass like it was wine. Dobby sat near the edge, lit cig hanging lazily between his fingers, watching the room through half-lidded eyes. Watching through the rising curl of cig smoke, he took the time to look at the new additions, like really look at them. A few seats down the bar, one of the new faces had parked himself like he owned the place. Brick. The kid looked barely 18, but was already 3 beers deep, popping the caps off like he was hydrating between kill sprees. His hat, some ratty red thing with worn stitching, was tossed on the bar beside him. Like even it needed a break from that oversized ego. He had long, red-orange hair fanned behind his neck, down to his back, in some chaotic, windswept flames. The kind of look that screamed, I lit a match and watched it burn. Everything about him was loud, from the BLD-tinted visor shades to the crimson trench coat that dragged behind him like a bad omen. Black vest and pants, chain belt, clawed rings. Too much metal, too much rage, too much DMN attitude. And yet, he sat still, coiled, quiet, like a bomb wired to detonate at the first wrong word. Dabi wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he was watching him now. He couldn't help it. The BRT had a presence, sure, but it was the kind that made his teeth grind. Brick must have felt the stare, because he looked up, scowling. "What you looking at, ugly?" he snapped, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Dabi tilted his head slightly, blowing out a stream of smoke without blinking. "Aren't you a little too young to be drinking, kid?" Brick leaned back in his stool, a slow, smug curl of a grin forming. "Aren't you a little too up to be giving me life lessons, Scarface?" He turned away with a dry chuckle, grabbing another bottle like the conversation hadn't just lit a fuse. Dabi's jaw clenched. Heat flickered under his skin, scars itching like they wanted to burn again. Arrogant little bstrd. He knew to keep this one under a watchful eye. He then took the opportunity to observe the other one. The other new guy was all neon arrogance and sharp edges. Thick, spiked hair that looked like it had lost a fight with a blender, glowing green streaks that pulsed faintly under the shitty bar lights. He moved like he didn't care who he stepped on, camo pants dragging, boots loud, wearing a dark green mesh undershirt and black fingerless gloves. Every bit of him screamed, problem. Dabi watched him zero in on Toga, that DMN smirk already in place. The kind of look that a predator had before it went after their prey. Butch leaned in too close, voice oozing sleaze. "You know, a girl like you must be sharp enough to cut through a guy's boredom, huh?" A lecherous smile on. Toga didn't smile. Didn't giggle. She tilted her head just enough to show teeth, eyes glinting yellow under the light. That warning she gave was something akin to "try me and you suffer." But surprisingly to her, Butch just laughed. Chuckled like the disgust on Toga's face was a punchline, not a threat. The thin line between flirtation and a knife to the ribs seemed to be exactly where he liked to stand. "Don't worry, baby girl," he grinned, teeth too white and too wide. "I can handle a little biting." That was enough. Toga didn't laugh. She didn't even snap back. She just slipped away, fast and quiet, a rare sign that showed that even she was uncomfortable by the guy's forwardness. Dabi didn't know much about these two, or the other one, and he didn't care, so long as they didn't get in his way, all would be fine. With that, he took a long drag, exhaled smoke slowly like it bored him. "All of you shut it," Tamura muttered, rising from his seat. His scratchy voice cut through the noise like rusted metal. He turned toward the far side of the room, where shadows gathered thick around a shape half-lit by flickering fluorescent light. "You're disturbing our guest." There, slumped against the wall like a trophy no one wanted to polish, sat Bakugou Katsuki. His arms were clamped down by reinforced steel braces, bulky and mechanical, bolted to the floor in front of him. The kind of tech built specifically to keep him from using his quirk, from even twitching the palms that usually lit the sky on fire. His hands were locked closed, fingers curled tight inside containment cuffs. But it wasn't his restraints that filled the room with tension. It was his eyes. A murderous glare, quiet and boiling. No yelling, no explosions. Just pure, focused hate, coiled behind gritted teeth and clenched jaw. He hadn't said a word since they dragged him in. He didn't have to. He sneered at them all like they weren't even worth the breath to curse. Tamura crouched a little, head tilting as he studied Bakugou like he was a cracked statue. "You should be thankful we got you out of there," he said, tone mockingly kind. "Away from all the lies and that disgusting hero training. You're free now." Bakugou didn't blink. His sneer deepened. Muscles in his jaw flexed. "Not a word." Tamura scoffed, standing up again. "Whatever. You'll see our side is the right one. Really soon." Bakugou just thought to himself, "Doubt it, freak show." A low, guttural grumble suddenly rolled through the room, cutting through the heavy air. Spinner stirred on a nearby couch, groaning as he lifted his head. What the hell was that? The two rowdy rough punks broke into rough laughter, already knowing the answer. Serves her right. Brick voiced out. Dobby let out a sigh, flicking ash onto the floor. Looks like our other guest is at it again. Toga, eyes a little too curious, tilted her head with a sudden mix of worry and fascination. But shouldn't she be too weak to move? She hasn't eaten in days. Dobby just shrugged, irritated more than concerned. Guess the beach is harder to keep down than expected. Butch leaned back, tell me about it, muttering low with a smirk. Bakugou didn't look, but he knew. He knew exactly who they were talking about. And it didn't make him worry. No. It made him pissed. Pissed that he was lumped in this shitty situation with her. Pissed that they hadn't killed her, or that she hadn't killed them. Like she could. Tomura sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like a parent dealing with unruly children. I believe the MSTR is going to finally meet her, after all. The room fell quiet again, save for the hum of tension and low flickering light. The chamber was quiet, far from the raucous noise of the bar and the frayed edges of villain camaraderie. Here, the air was still and suffocating, like the room itself was holding its breath. At the center, seated in a wide, obsidian black throne built more like a machine than a chair, sat All for One. Time had reshaped him, no longer the towering figure of brute intimidation from his prime, but something colder, more insidious. His once powerful physique had thinned beneath the black suit and white-collared shirt, yet nothing about him looked weak. The smooth white of his skull-like breathing apparatus gleamed under the dim lighting, angular tubes twitching faintly as they hissed with steady, mechanical breath. The high, collar-like life support wrapped around his neck pulsed with dim blue energy, every pipe a reminder of his damaged body, and the power he still commanded. Though he had no eyes, it didn't mean that he wasn't aware of his surroundings, or the presence of the certain guests he had in his sight. To his left, reclining lazily in a plush red velvet chair, sat Mr. X, also known as him. Draped in shadows and mischief, he held a thin-stemmed wine glass in long, clawed fingers, its contents a dark, thick red that wasn't entirely wine. A devilish smile played on his black, smeared lips as he swirled the glass slowly. He didn't slouch out of fatigue, he lounged like a cat near a mouse hole, confident, predatory, and amused. To the right, curled on the floor like a child mid-play, was Boomer. And just like his brothers, he had gone through a change that was not seen as good. He had longer, blonde, chaotic hair tied up into two messy, horn-like tufts, blue streaks catching the low light like neon wires. His outfit looked like a dare, wearing a patched-up hoodie, one breathed leg torn into shorts, the other dragging like a forgotten afterthought. Light blue ankle-high socks and black sneakers scuffed the floor as he kicked his feet back and forth. Boomer held a tiny, trembling creature, some warped animal or failed gnome-like thing, with its limbs twitching, squealing softly. His blue eyes lit up as he giggled while dangling it by one leg. Every time I squish it, he whispered, voice full of innocent glee, it twitches funny. Like it knows it's not gonna make it to the end of the game. His chuckle was light, playful. Then he twisted one of the creature's arms just a bit too far, and it shrieked. And Boomer just laughed harder. Well, Mr. X, All for One spoke, his voice calm and surgical. I do hope I haven't kept either of you waiting. Mr. X took a slow sip from his glass, unbothered. You and your... My son, yes, he answered before the sentence was finished. The word dripped with amusement. All for One nodded slightly. Yes. Your son. Quite. He gave a low chuckle of his own, one that didn't reach the air around him. But the levity fell flat as he continued, his tone dipped just slightly. Though I must admit, I'm a little disappointed. Neither of your sons retrieved a certain young woman for me. Her quirk would have been crucial to my disciple's evolution. The last word was still calm, but underneath it, there was something else. A quiet rage, buried deep. Not a roar, but a weight, like pressure slowly building beneath concrete. Mr. X merely chuckled again, eyes glittering like a serpent's. Oh, come now. Why so moopy? He sat up straighter, facing the man with his whole body, like a silent threat. You shattered the public's trust in their precious hero school, turned the media into chaos, and managed to snag not one but two quite powerful pawns. He leaned forward just a little, the playful light dimming in his voice. One of those students, might I remind you, could be the very key to your other plans, Even without eyes, Mr. X could feel the glare aimed at him. The room seemed to shrink slightly under the invisible pressure leaking off All for One. He didn't flinch. He never flinched. All for One's silence lingered a second longer before he suddenly let out a breathy, amused sound. You're right, Mr. X. He straightened in his seat, voice light once again, but no less cold. And that being said, we should go visit our other guest. It would be impolite of me to ignore her much longer. Mr. X stood gracefully, setting his wine glass on a small silver tray beside him. Quite so, he said, dusting invisible lint from his pink tulle. He looked over at Boomer, still humming to himself and tapping the creature's skull like it was a drum. Oh, Boomy, Mr. X sang in a lilting voice. Let's go and see dear Buttercup, shall we? Boomer's cobalt eyes lit up, a cruel spark flickering in their depths. He dropped the half-dead thing without a second thought, rising to his feet in a bouncing motion. Yeah. Let's. The hallway to the bunker was long and clinical, carved from matte steel and humming faintly with hidden machinery. The walls pulsed with a subtle blue glow from embedded lines of energy, like veins running through the metal. Pipes hissed gently from the ceiling, steam wafting through grated vents as the trio moved deeper underground. Boomer walked with a bouncing step, hands clasped behind his back, sneakers scuffing the floor with no sense of urgency. Mr. X floated forward with elegance, every step theatrical, as if the shadows bent to make way for him. All for One followed behind them, measured and composed, every step echoing like a clock ticking toward inevitability. Ahead, the sounds grew louder, muffled grunts, the thunder of impact, and the unmistakable whine of energy discharges. Metal groaned. The walls shuddered faintly under pressure. Mr. X let out a soft chuckle, tilting his head toward the noise. Ah, looks like she's raring to meet her guests. They reached a thick iron blast door, cold to the touch and engraved with containment symbols scorched into its frame. With a soft hiss and a heavy clank, it slid open. Inside the room, was chaos contained. Buttercup, still dressed in the same torn clothes she'd worn when they took her, was a flurry of motion. Green light radiated off her like a sun barely held in check. She zipped through the air, fists and feet smashing into the glowing energy force field that boxed her in. She fired beam after beam, her signature green eye lasers slicing across the walls as she shouted, each blast echoing her fury. Ray! Let me out! She reeled back and hurled a spinning orb of energy, only for it to crash uselessly against the shimmering barrier. Mr. X let his voice rise in a melodic lilt. Oh Buttercup, we've come to visit you. Still facing away, Buttercup growled. I don't want no visitors. Thanks, but F off. So rude, young lady. Mr. X sked like a disappointed parent. And here I thought you would be at least gracious to the man I brought with me, who is showing you such hospitality. At that, Buttercup stopped mid-blast. Hospitality, she whispered, her aura flaring like a storm. She turned slowly, green sparks trailing behind her. Her hair was wild, face flushed, eyes glowing, she roared. Hospitality this. She hurled a massive green sphere of energy, straight at them. But the force field caught it with ease, crackling as the energy fizzled and died. Naya, you can't hit us. Boomer stuck his tongue out, bouncing on his heels. My force field's way stronger than that baby Bubbles, so there. He blew a raspberry, wiggling his fingers at her like a BRTTY little brother. Buttercup clenched her fists, practically vibrating with fury. Why I oughta. But then a sound cut through it all. A dry, calm clearing of the throat. All for One stepped forward, letting his presence press down on the room like a cold fog. Well, hello Buttercup Utonium. The moment her real name hit the air, Buttercup froze. She turned, slow and wary, eyes narrowing at the masked figure. Who the hell is this shriveled-up prune? Your boyfriend? Mr. X laughed, smooth and amused. Oh, darling, he's not quite my type. All for One let out a low, almost amused chuckle, but it didn't touch his posture. Miss Utonium, so it's true. You and your sisters are not from around here. Your behavior, your energy fascinating. Buttercup crossed her arms, unimpressed, despite the exhaustion bleeding into her limbs. I've heard a lot about you, All for One continued, from my partner and... Yeah. Well, partner, huh? She cut him off. Guess you really don't have standards. Mr. X turned toward him, grinning widely. Oh, and you heard about me, did you? Buttercup took one bold step forward, eyes blazing. Good. Then you better know that when I get out of here, I'm gonna kick both your A snap of fingers echoed. From within the walls, thin red bolts of energy shot out, slamming into her from every angle. Buttercup screamed, back arching, electricity flashing through her body. The lights flared. The energy scorched what little fabric she had left. And still, she didn't fall. And when the energy was cut off, all the screams died down and what was heard was panting. Smoldering, Buttercup stood, smoke rising from her arms and back. Her glare didn't waver. Boomer was on the floor laughing at what he did, like it was some of joke to him. Mr. X chuckled, sipping on the air like it were fine wine. But All for One was silent. He stepped forward. No words. Just power. A slow, invisible rise of pressure, like the air thickened, gravity turning cruel. And Buttercup didn't move. It was like she didn't feel it. Like it didn't crush her. Didn't bend her knees. It rolled over her like a bad wind, and she met it without even noticing it. All for One's breath hitched softly in his mask. Interesting, he then said aloud, Mr. X, I'm quite pleased with this discovery. The sample you graciously gave us will be invaluable once we unlock it. I'm sure my head scientist will make excellent use of it. Mr. X twirled his fingers playfully. It'll be quite the experiment, darling. All for One ignored the teasing. He turned and left without another word. Boomer gave Buttercup one last raspberry and skipped out like a child who just won a game. And then it was just her and him. Buttercup's voice was hoarse, but she forced strength into it. All right, clown face, spill it. What are you doing with Prune Face, and what the hell did you tell him? About us? About Chemical X? Him just chuckled, slow and low. My, Buttercup. You've always been, so observa. Answer me. Buttercup slammed her foot down, energy surging, the ground trembling around them. The laughter stopped. Him looked at her now. Really looked. His smile dropped, not gone, but warped. He stepped forward, slowly, and something in Buttercup's gut told her to back away. She didn't. She stood her ground even as he phased right through the force field like it was nothing. Her eyes widened. He was in there with her. What I'm planning, he whispered, voice now low and dark, will be quite the show. And it will involve my new little toys. He tilted his head, inches from her now. But don't worry. That creature doesn't know what I really want. None of them do. Suddenly, his clawed hand shot out, wrapping around her neck, lifting her into the air. Buttercup gasped, legs kicking, hands clawing at his arm, but it was like steel. She thrashed, too surprised and shocked to remember her powers. Trust me, Buttercup, he hissed. This world. It'll be the final stomping ground, for you and your sisters, so don't worry about these meat bags. Their voice warped, eliciting a shiver. For we will one day really have fun, and just like that, he dropped her like discarded trash, and before she could even catch her breath, he was already fading. "Ta-ta, Buttercup," him sang in his high, lilting voice, amusement dripping from every syllable. "And do rest up, you wouldn't want to be too exhausted for what's to come." He chuckled, as flames curled around him, crimson and unnatural, swallowing him whole until he vanished, leaving only the scent of sulfur and the echo of his laughter behind. And just like that, Buttercup was alone again. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven gasps, the burn of his grip still fresh around her throat, even as no marks were left to show. She could feel her heart pounding, not from the pain, no, but from something familiar, colder, deeper. Fear. She forced herself to breathe. Slower. Deeper. To still the tremble in her hands. She wouldn't cry. She refused. Her eyes scanned the sealed cell, metal walls, scorched marks from her failed escape attempts, and the ever-humming force field that caged her in. It was the same scene she'd woken up to these couple of days and the same one she fell asleep in every night. She muttered bitterly under her breath, barely a whisper. The curse tasted like iron. The pain had already gone, but her hunger gnawed at her harder than before. Her limbs were heavy, her body finally crashing after the adrenaline drained out of her like a popped balloon. She was exhausted, so she did what she'd done for the past few days, the only thing she could do. She curled up in the corner, arms around her knees, and let the dark settle in. Not because she was giving up. But because him was right about one thing. She had to conserve her strength because she would get out. And when she did, they were all going to pay. As she closed her eyes, she was met with sleep and a memory inside her dream. A number of buildings trembled as a monstrous force tore through the streets of Townsville. Cars flipped. Power lines snapped. Smoke curled into the sky like a warning. People screamed as chaos surged through the city. The monster, towering and grotesque, was a twisted fusion of obsidian black scales and pulsating, glowing orange veins. Its body resembled a warped lizard, but with 6 massive arms ending in serrated claws. Rows of jagged fangs jutted from its elongated jaw, and curved horns swept back over its hunched, armored shoulders. Its eyes, fiery red slits, radiated with rage. With a guttural, otherworldly roar, the beast opened its gaping maw and fired a blast of searing violet energy from its throat. The beam tore through buildings, shattering glass and incinerating steel. Towers collapsed. Streets split. Townsville trembled. Screams echoed through the ruins. Civilians ducked into shelters. Hope thinned. But hen. Boom. A green energy blast slammed into its chest, staggering the beast backward. It roared in pain and fury, shaking off the attack as it whipped around, searching the skies with snarling rage. People blinked up at the sky as a shadow hovered there, framed by the sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Could it be? Is that? Then someone shouted, voice rising with hope, "It's Buttercup." The monster shook off the blast and snarled. Its spines flared, mouth opening for another strike. But before it could fire, a voice rang out across the city, calm, cocky, and full of fire. "Hey, ugly." The creature paused, eyes narrowing. "I don't appreciate the you're doing to my town. But, because I am feeling good today, as a sign of goodwill," she cracked her knuckles. "I'll let you leave, after you apologize and clean up this mess you made." Her fists glowed faintly green, her hair whipping in the wind. She didn't flinch as the monster roared again in defiance, ready to launch another energy blast straight at her. She actually hoped for the hard way. "Look out, Buttercup," someone shouted from below. "Get out of there. You'll get hurt." But she didn't move. She didn't even blink as the beam hit her dead on, and a massive explosion of violet light engulfed her form. A wave of fire and smoke rippled across the sky. The city gasped. People shielded their eyes. Some screamed. Some cried. The monster didn't stop to check, too busy reveling in the destruction. Until slow, deliberate sound echoed through the smoke. Clap. 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 Everyone looked up. The creature hesitated, and then she emerged, completely unharmed. Buttercup floated forward, dust brushing off her shoulders. "Nice shot, Buster," she said, her voice low and amused. Nice shot indeed, but not so great. The smoke finally cleared, and her eyes were glowing. A deep, dangerous green, as her smirk had sharpened into something almost manic. The monster took a step back. It sensed something. Something bad. Something powerful. Something evil. Buttercup tilted her head and cracked her neck. Her aura began to flare, green energy pulsing like a storm building inside her. "How about I show you what real power looks like?" And then it was on. Battle scene. The battle didn't slow. If anything, it was getting worse. Townsville had already been torn to pieces. Entire streets were cratered beyond recognition, and buildings stood only as twisted skeletons or smoldering piles of rubble. Flames licked the broken sidewalks, and smoke curled up in thick plumes that stained the sky a dark, choking gray. Glass was everywhere, and the sounds, cracking walls, roaring flames, screaming civilians, painted a clear picture of the chaos. In the middle of it, Buttercup and the monster were locked in a brutal brawl. Buttercup darted through the air like a green streak, fists charged with energy as she pounded the massive monster again and again. Her punches landed with deep, echoing thuds, and the beast stumbled under the pressure, letting out frustrated bellows. It tried to counter with swipes of its massive claws, but she was too fast, slipping past its guard and landing another punch to its jaw, followed by a blast of energy to the chest. But then the monster changed tactics. With a sudden burst of movement, it caught Buttercup off guard. One of its giant arms came crashing down, slamming her midair. Wham! The impact was brutal. She was launched backward like a missile, smashing into the upper floors of a still-standing tower. Concrete and steel gave way like paper as her body tore through it. The building groaned, and a second later, it collapsed entirely in a thunderous explosion of dust and debris. The monster roared in what seemed to be triumph, the sound rumbling through the broken streets. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then, a sharp flash of green light exploded from the center of the wreckage. A concentrated beam shot straight into the sky, cutting through the clouds. Another beam followed it, this one aimed downward. And it struck the monster dead in the face. Boom! The beast reeled at the bullseye attack, howling in pain and rage as the blast left a burn mark across its snout. It staggered back, smoke curling from the scorched spot on its face. And then, a good distance, but still close enough, Buttercup appeared. She floated up to eye level with the beast, her small form surrounded by a green shimmer of energy. Her clothes were torn, and looking like rags, but she did not care, for she was very much still in the fight. She stretched her arms lazily, cracking her knuckles with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nice punch, pal," she said, casually rubbing her arm. Her voice was confident, laced with sarcasm. "I gotta say that attack was either good or I'm just a lot rusty." Then her expression shifted. The grin vanished, replaced by a flat, dangerous stare. She didn't raise her voice for what came next, but her tone made it land like a threat. "But it doesn't mean I'm weak." Her eyes flared green. A deep, pulsing glow, more warning than light, erupted. The monster shook off the last of the damage and turned on her fast. Its jaws opened, glowing with crackling violet energy. It fired again, this time larger, faster, and deadlier. The beam split the air with a high-pitched shriek. "All right," Buttercup grinned. "The gloves are off." She dove into action, as she moved just in time, zipping sideways as the beam roared past, and carving through what remained of a department store behind her. She didn't look back. She twisted around the next few beams, mid-air, flipping and weaving as it streaked past her and slammed into more buildings behind her, disintegrating it on contact. Instead, she came back harder, driving a right hook into the monster's gut, then spinning behind it for a solid roundhouse to the side of its head. The monster howled, stumbling, trying to swipe at her, but she kept coming. She unleashed a barrage of energy blasts from both hands, then followed with rapid punches coated in green energy. Her laser beams cut across its arms and chest, and it roared again, louder, more annoyed now. It was feeling it. Then its eyes narrowed. Suddenly, extra arms popped out, and 6 massive arms began to WHP around in wide arcs, faster and faster, swatting at anything in range like a whirling cage of death. Buttercup, caught off guard, did her best to maneuver through the surprise attack. She chose not to fly away, but to find the monster's weak spot. But it was too close now, mostly dodging what she could, flying hard and fast to keep up, but then. Wham! One arm slammed straight into her, breath left her in a sharp grunt as her body spiraled downward like a rock at full force, skidding across the ground, tearing up pavement, and crashing through parked cars and street signs. The impact carved a deep crater across several blocks before she finally stopped, lying in a motionless heap at the end of the trail. Smoke billowed over the broken ground. She groaned. She moved slightly, but before she could focus, the monster was already there, towering above her, fists raised. Then they came down. Bam! The first strike shook the street. Bam! 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 Over and over, the monster's massive fists slammed into the ground, pounding the crater where Buttercup lay. Each strike shook the earth, sending tremors through nearby buildings that trembled with every hit. Even blocks away, people could feel the vibrations rattling through the pavement. At the center of it all, Buttercup didn't move. Her small form was still, half buried in rubble, eyes shut, her breathing shallow. Dust clung to her skin, her arms limp at her sides, powerless. Then, through the chaos, she heard something, not the monster's roar, not the thunder of destruction, but a scream. It was sharp, in pain and oh so familiar. And that made something inside her snapped. Buttercup's eyes shot open, blazing with pure green fire. No! The scream tore from Buttercup's chest just as a violent energy pulse exploded from her body, blasting the monster off of her. The creature was thrown backward, slamming into the ruined street, ripping up what was left of the concrete. Buttercup blasted into the sky like a green comet, a trail of radiant energy flaring behind her. The faster she climbed, the more intense the pulse of her aura became, like a living heartbeat made of plasma and rage. High above the city, she stopped. She hovered in the air, suspended in the smoke-streaked sky, fists clenched at her sides. Her head hung low, the wind whipping through her short dark hair. For a second, there was only silence. Then her power surged. Bolts of lightning cracked across her arms. Her skin shimmered with unstable energy. Sparks jumped off her body as if she were a live wire ready to snap. Her eyes opened again, and now, there were no pupils. Just 2 blinding orbs of green light, glowing with pure power. And then she smiled. It was wide. Angry. Unstable. A grin that didn't belong on a kid's face, didn't belong on any face. Now we're talking, she shouted, and her voice echoed like a battle horn across the broken skyline. With a cry of pure war, she dove. She didn't fall, she launched. Her body became a missile, wrapped in an inferno of green light and flickering lightning. The air howled around her as she cut through the clouds, her cry growing louder, her power surging with every second. She looked dangerous. She looked unstoppable. She wasn't holding back. Down below, the monster scrambled on all fours, its claws digging into the broken street as it tried to get upright. Its burning red eyes widened, reflecting the glow of the falling force coming straight for it. It saw her. It felt her. And for the first time in the battle it hesitated. It understood. If she hit the ground at that speed, with that much energy behind her, this fight would be over. But not without cost. Then, just as the moment reached its peak, a voice rang out. Buttercup, stop. It's over. The words sliced through the chaos like a blade. Buttercup didn't stop immediately. The wind still screamed around her. Her fists remained locked tight, wrapped in surging plasma. Lightning continued crawling across her arms and legs like it was alive. Her war cry cracked the sky. Then another voice pierced the chaos. Buttercup. You're done. Not one voice now, but two, Blossoms and Bubbles. Both calling out, desperate, loud. Buttercup's eyes flared. Her teeth clenched. She didn't stop, not yet. The power surrounding her still roared. Her fists, locked tight, were wrapped in volatile green plasma. Lightning danced along her limbs like it had a mind of its own. Her scream tore from her throat as she stopped dead midair. What? The sudden halt crackled with power, the momentum from her dive dispersing in a shockwave that rippled across the sky. Her energy aura swirled violently around her, like a storm being held back by sheer force of will. And just like that, everything around her began to melt away. The ruined buildings, the shattered roads, the flaming wreckage, even the monster, it all started flickering, glitching, like a game shutting down. The destruction dissolved into light and shimmered out of existence, pixel by pixel. The cracked street beneath the monster vanished, revealing near spotless white flooring beneath it. The clouds in the sky were replaced with flat panels. The city was gone. Buttercup hovered in the middle of a blank, high-tech room. The training simulator. She was still breathing hard, still glowing faintly, the power barely contained. Her hands trembled with leftover adrenaline. Her fists slowly uncurled as realization started to sink in. The searing light of battle dimmed, replaced by sterile white illumination. Then her voice broke the silence. What the hell was that? She shouted, eyes darting around, furious and confused. What the actual hell? From across the chamber, a section of the wall shimmered, then shifted, to a long viewing window becoming clear, revealing the familiar control room. Inside stood Professor Utonium at the controls, arms folded, eyes sharp, expression unamused. Beside him, Blossom and Bubbles stared with distinct emotions. Blossom's brow was furrowed. Bubbles looked worrisome. Professor Utonium leaned closer to the comm mic, his voice stern and unwavering as it echoed through the chamber. Watch that kind of language, young lady. You're in enough trouble as it is. Pressing a button and the two-way window became opaque again. Buttercup didn't respond at first. Her body was still pulsing with leftover energy, tiny sparks jumping from her fingers. Her shoulders rose and fell with each sharp breath, and the glow in her eyes hadn't fully faded. But then she exhaled, hard, and let it all go. The power flickered out like a dying flame. Her feet touched the clean, polished floor. She didn't even look at the window. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly over her chest, turned her head to the side, and muttered through clenched teeth, whatever. The word hit the air with all the force of a slammed door. Defiant. Frustrated. And still burning. Back in the control room, the professor disabled the two-way mirror and reviewed the data his monitoring system had picked up. Buttercup, he muttered, sighing heavily, a sound filled with exhaustion and growing frustration. Not far from him stood the other two girls, still in their sleepwear. Bubbles wore a baby blue t-shirt and pajama shorts, clutching her stuffed octopus tightly. Blossom was dressed in a pink nightgown with white trimmings, her hair tucked neatly into a bonnet. Both girls had sleep in their eyes and were clearly not thrilled about being woken up in the middle of the night. I seriously can't believe the stunt she pulled this time, Blossom grumbled, crossing her arms. Bubbles tried to speak through a yawn, hardly stay awake. It was around 2 a.m. when the professor had burst into their room, looking frantic. He quickly shook them awake, explaining that Buttercup was missing. The girls, groggy and confused, didn't understand what was going on until the professor hurriedly clarified, his lab sensors, which now synced to his phone ever since Bubbles' sneaky little training accident a few years back, had sent him an alert. The training simulator had been activated. And worse, it was set to level 11 and showing signs of a critical power usage. Safe to say, they were all wide awake and wondering what Buttercup could be up to. They were brought out of their thoughts when the simulator door opened, and out came a not-so-happy Buttercup, floating. The professor stood up at that. "Hold it right there, little lady," he stated, walking over to her, with the girls following behind. Buttercup, already annoyed, wanted to zip past them and head right up to her room, but she knew that if she let this stall, it would be more annoying to deal with later. So, she turned to the professor. "What?" she responded curtly. The professor was not at all pleased. "Don't give me that attitude, Buttercup, you have a lot of explaining to do," he scolded. "You know you are not supposed to be in the lab at this time of the night, especially being that it is school tomorrow and your powers." But Buttercup didn't let him finish. Yeah, Professor, I know, okay. I just needed to work on something." Her arms were crossed, her expression set in that classic scowl of hers. But Professor wasn't having it. "Buttercup, you know that you aren't allowed to use your powers, or else." "Or else what?" she shouted, eyes flaring green with frustration. For a tense second, the room froze in silence, neither father nor daughter backing down. Bubbles hugged her arms to herself. Blossom's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. The professor sighed, his tone heavy with fatigue. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Just go to your room, and get to bed. We will talk about this another day." He turned to the others. "All of us should get to bed." Buttercup scoffed and rolled her eyes, floating backwards. "Fine. Whatever. Night." She zipped off in a blur of green. "Don't fly, oh, what do I do?" the professor groaned, one hand raised in futility as Buttercup vanished upstairs. He slumped slightly. Blossom gently walked up to him, her face in a neutral expression. "It's okay, Professor. We'll all talk to her." She gave him a small smile, even though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good night." With that, she turned and headed up the stairs. "Right, Blossom," he said, mostly to himself, watching her go. As he turned back toward the kitchen, he felt something tug gently at his leg. He looked down. Bubbles had wrapped her arms around his leg, in a quiet hug, her face pressed against his lab coat. "She doesn't mean it," she mumbled sleepily, "she's just scared." The professor knelt down slowly and wrapped his arms around her. "I know, sweetheart. Night, Bubbles. Don't worry." She gave a sleepy nod, let go, and trudged upstairs, her bunny slippers dragging softly on each step. Now alone, the professor stood in the dim light of the lab-turned living room. His eyes wandered, eventually settling across the room on a corkboard, covered in pinned papers, blueprints, and glowing scribbles. Charts and diagrams labeled with the girls' names. Red arrows. Circles. Question marks. Some notes that seemed to date back for months. He walked over and stared at the board, tracing a finger along a timeline labeled, Emergence Timeline, and Unstable Energy Responses. "What am I going to do?" he murmured, barely above a whisper. Utonium household, upstairs. Bubbles dragged her feet up the stairs, eyes heavy with sleep but her mind still buzzing. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her sleeve, only to stop mid-step when she felt heard voices, raised and heavy, echoing faintly down the hall. "Oh no," she whispered. The sound grew louder as she neared her bedroom door, cracked open just enough for her to slip inside and see Blossom and Buttercup, standing face to face, mid-argument. "You never think things through." Blossom snapped, hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're always charging in, no plan, and no thought for the consequences." "Oh please," Buttercup scoffed, arms crossed and eyes gleaming with defiance. "Not my fault you're jealous, I'm the one who doesn't give up. You ever think maybe you're just mad I don't quit like you do?" "Jealous?" Blossom's voice rose, exasperated. "Unlike you, I actually listen to the professor when he says we aren't allowed to do something. Because I care what happens when we don't. Buttercup let out a sharp laugh. Oh yeah? Like not saving Townsville is a brilliant plan. Great leadership, Blossom. Gold star. The professor's just trying to make sure we're okay, Bubbles said, stepping forward into the room, her voice soft but cutting off any reply from either side. He doesn't want us to get hurt again. That seemed stop them from arguing. Both Blossom and Buttercup turned to finally look at her. Neither said anything, but the heat in the room simmered down, just a bit. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Buttercup broke it first, rolling her eyes and flying past Blossom toward the bed. Whatever, she muttered. I feel fine. It ain't my fault you two are too scared to use your powers again. She yanked back the covers and flopped into her side of the bed. Good night, babies, she added pointedly, yanking the blanket over her shoulder with a flourish. Blossom didn't reply, but her jaw was tight, eyes lighting up for a quick second before gone, as she turned away and quietly got in to the edge of her side. Bubbles stood there for a second longer, then slowly climbed into the middle, curling up beneath the covers. As she tried not to let her emotions overwhelm her, but couldn't stop a few stray tears falling down. Night. She said, more so to herself, as she fell asleep. Not noticing a blue glow of her own, going off before gone. Utonium residence. The sun peeked gently over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the quiet neighborhood. Birds chirped. Sprinklers sputtered to life. The familiar hum of a new day waking up. Inside the Utonium residence, it was anything but calm. Upstairs, the girl's bedroom was a flurry of motion. Bubbles hummed to herself softly as she pulled on a light blue dress with cloud patterns, wearing a pair of white leggings underneath. On her feet were pale yellow flats that added a cheerful pop of color, decorated with tiny dolphins. Her hair was brushed into two perfect pigtails tied neatly at either side of her head, and her stuffed octopus sat beside her bed like a silent morning guardian. Blossom, already fully dressed, stood in front of the mirror. She wore a neat pink button-up blouse with a white collar tucked into a knee-length pink pleated skirt. White knee-high socks and pink Mary Janes completed the look. Her signature red bow was freshly fluffed and perched perfectly on top of her neatly combed long red hair. She was just adjusting it for the third time when another whoosh came, blowing her hair into a puffed-up mess. Can you please stop flying around the room and just get dressed like a normal person? Blossom asked sharply, not even turning as she spoke. Buttercup zipped past again in a streak of green light, brushing her teeth while floating upside down. Defined normal, she said through a mouthful of toothpaste, spinning lazily in the air. Blossom shot her a glare through the mirror. You know what I mean. Buttercup landed lightly in front of her dresser and grinned, foam still at the corners of her mouth. Bloss, I get that us having fingers and looking like everyone else now is a big deal to you, but we ain't normal. And I'm not gonna downgrade myself just to fake it. That's really rude, Bubbles chimed in quietly, brushing her hair as she looked over from her side of the room. It's the truth. Buttercup rolled her eyes, spitting into the sink of their shared bathroom. And it's not like pretending changes anything. People still stare. Still whisper. It's been, what, a couple of months. And I already know which hallways not to walk through unless I want to hear them say, oh, you don't look like Buttercup of the Powerpuff Girls, like what the hell, she growled out. Blossom and Bubbles exchanged a glance. A quiet, knowing look passed between them. Buttercup's words weren't just frustration about the morning routine or the usual back and forth with Blossom. There was more under the surface, and they both could feel it. Neither said anything, but the silence between them seemed to thrum with unspoken concern. The morning light poured in through the window, warm and golden, catching the dust in soft beams across the bedroom floor. It was another day of them being in the 3rd grade. They had grown. Not just in height or age, though both were true, but in ways that were and weren't as easy to see. The past year had brought change. Big, messy, confusing change. Their powers had shifted. Their bodies had evolved. They didn't quite look like the small, baby doll, sugar-coated heroes they used to be. And with those changes came challenges. Adjustments. Awkward moments and questions without answers. Still, somehow, they made it through. One step at a time. Some days were easier than others. Buttercup didn't feel like this was one of those days. She snapped on her outfit for the day, a striped, navy green shirt with black ripped-up shorts and scuffed-up sneakers. Her hair was still a mess, intentionally so, and she grabbed a black wristband from the dresser, snapping it onto her left arm with a sharp motion. Done. See? No flying needed. Happy, she called out before dashing downstairs, leaving her sisters behind. Downstairs, Professor Utonium was at the stove, flipping the last of the pancakes onto a plate. Better call the girls, he muttered to himself, as the bacon sizzled nearby and a pot of oatmeal bubbled gently. Just as he reached for the orange juice, a gust of wind and a loud BAM echoed behind him. He turned. Buttercup was already seated at the table, legs kicked up, one arm draped across the back of the chair. "Here, Professor," she said with a smug smile. He didn't jump, he was too used to it, but his shoulders tensed. He turned to look at her. "Good morning, Buttercup," he said with practiced calm, his voice kind but measured. "You got here fast." Speed's my thing, remember," she shrugged. "Might as well use it now, while I still can. You know, before I get to school and gotta play pretend again." The bitterness in her voice was hard to miss. "Language," the professor warned gently, catching the sharp edge of her tone. He wanted to say something. About the simulator. About the rules. But he let it go, for now. Choosing his battles, he sighed. "Pancakes are ready," he said instead, setting the plate in front of her. Soon, the other girls walked down the stairs. Bubbles gave a little wave and yawned. "Morning." Blossom nodded politely. "Good morning, Professor." The three of them sat down at the table, each settling into their own spots and into a somewhat comfortable silence. A familiar rhythm. Then the professor spoke up again, "All right, finish up and get your things ready. I'll drive you to school today." Buttercup stopped mid-bite. "Wait, drive us?" "I don't think the bus is the best option anymore," he said plainly, as he turned to grab his keys. "There's been attention. People noticing. I'd rather avoid any issues." "Well, duh. Attention is our hallmark," Buttercup argued. "It's normal." "Well, kind of. Or I could just fly. That's fastest." "You're not flying to school," the professor said firmly, without looking at her. Buttercup crossed her arms. "Come on. I can fly low. It won't be draining, like the old times." "I said no," he replied, this time turning to meet her gaze. "We've been over this. The point is to keep things under control. You know that." "No," she muttered, her voice low. "The point is to keep me quiet." There was a pause. The other girls stayed silent. "You don't trust me," Buttercup added, her voice sharper now. "That's not true," the professor said, more firmly than before. "This is about keeping you safe. For all of you. It's about protecting what's important." Buttercup scoffed, "Yeah, well, maybe some of us don't want to be protected," and looked away, muttering under her breath, "Maybe some of us want to matter." So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 15. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author ChiWriters on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.